All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Fuchs, and I am a senior specialist in the Community Education Department at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar on nutrition with neuromuscular disease. This learning event is part of our larger MDA community education programs, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the community education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. We are recording today's webinar, and it will be posted to our website for on-demand viewing at a later date. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar with today's presenters. Simply use the chat feature to type in your questions throughout the presentation, and we will address those at the end. And a little bit about MDA before we begin. For nearly 75 years, MDA has led the way in funding research to accelerate the development of new treatments, expanding access to care and clinical trials through the MDA Care Center Network, and advocating for access and inclusion for the neuromuscular disease community. MDA delivers its mission through research, care, advocacy, and engagement. Since its inception, MDA has invested more than $1.1 billion in neuromuscular disease research. MDA funds projects throughout the drug development spectrum, from early discovery through translational stages and infrastructure support for clinical trials. At MDA care centers located at over 150 top medical institutions nationwide, people living with neuromuscular disease and their families find more than medical expertise. They experience a community fiercely dedicated to advancing access to care and nurturing hope. MDA's advocacy network focuses on support for accelerated approvals and novel research, access to healthcare, treatments, independent living, newborn screening, accessible air travel, and more. This focus plays a vital role in shaping laws and policies that support the needs of people living with rare neuromuscular diseases. Our community education and recreation programs are designed to connect individuals and families. We are committed to building a nurturing environment where our members can share experiences, triumphs, and challenges. In 2023, we offered over 40 educational programs, over 20 summer camps, and dozens of other community-based activities, both in person and virtually. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us, and registering is free. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Umme Salma Vahanvaty and Tad Campbell. Umme is a registered dietitian at the Neuromuscular Clinic and the General Nutrition Clinic at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Umme has cared for children and young adults with neuromuscular diseases for the last 12 years. Umme has been invited to speak at local and national conferences by the Muscular Dystrophy Association and Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. She has contributed to several articles for the MDA Quest magazine. Umme Salma describes herself as a lifelong learner with a passion for advancing the role of nutrition in the health and well-being of children and young adults with special healthcare needs. Tad Campbell is an assistant professor in the clinical nutrition department in the School of Health Professions at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. He attended Baylor University, where he earned a Bachelor of Business Administration in Accounting and Information Systems. He later attended the Master of Clinical Nutrition Coordinated Program at UTSW, earning an MCN degree. Tad joined the faculty of the same program where he now teaches, precepts and mentors students, as well as provides medical nutritional therapy for patients with chronic illnesses, including ALS, MS, PD, obesity, diabetes, and others. Tad is a member of a multidisciplinary clinic, ALS clinic, where he works with a team of providers to improve the quality of life for people living with ALS. Additionally, Mr. Campbell sponsors multiple campus student groups and sits on the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, sorry, my tongue, and in the subcommittee. Thank you for being here today. And now I will turn the time over to you.
I'll make sure I'm sharing the right screen. All right, thank you, Sarah. Do I have the right screen shared? I think I do. So our topic today is nutrition in neuromuscular disease, and that can be a super broad topic with a lot of ground to cover. So today, we're going to be going over some of the more common questions that we get in clinic. We'll start with a discussion of what a registered dietitian is and what our role is on the care team. From there, we'll move into a discussion of basic, balanced, and healthful nutrition. We'll go into some of the common nutrition-related concerns and challenges we see across various neuromuscular diseases and highlight any considerations that are specific to the pediatric population. Supplements are a common question we get, as well as questions about feeding tubes, so we'll be sure to cover those as well. And finally, we'll talk briefly on payment for these services and then wrap up with your questions.
So when we're working with new families that have been referred to us, I like to describe our role on a multidisciplinary team. Unlike this picture, I hope that you don't view us as the food police or people who try to guilt our families into eating some foods, and that we do more than just manage the kitchen in a hospital. Moving on. So as over the next few minutes, I hope to kind of give you some more insight into our role on the multidisciplinary team so that the next time you see a dietitian, you know what topics we can cover and what are the other things you can discuss with us. One of the first things we do is we try to get an idea of what our patients eat throughout the day so that we can do a qualitative assessment of their intake for both macro and micronutrients. So macronutrients are the big food groups like proteins, grains, fruits and vegetables, etc. And micronutrients cover vitamins, minerals, and electrolytes. So we ask a lot of questions. We do a lot of talking. We ask about what foods you eat, how much you eat, what beverages you're drinking, and then we compare all of that information to what we estimate as what your needs are. And those needs are based on your age, on mobility level, your weight goals, and any special needs like increased protein needs that may be required for wound healing. We're also available to discuss the pros and cons of any special diets that you may want to consider. Like a common question I get is about the amino acid diet for SMA in pediatrics and then intermittent fasting. Next, we want to assess whether what our patients are eating is adequate for them to maintain a healthy body. And I would describe a healthy body as a body that is working at its full potential. So we aim to maintain fat and muscle mass at levels that help our patients recover fast from illness, maintain healthy skin structure, and maintain muscle strength. And to do so, we look at the patient's weight, their body stores, and in children, we have to also look at their height and head circumference for the infants. We assess for acceptable rates of weight gain and weight loss and linear growth. So after we've looked at the anthropometrics, we've looked at your diet, we also want to make sure we're screening for and recommending interventions for any issues that affect your ability to consume what you need to have a healthy body. So this ranges from screening for GI concerns like constipation, reflux, gastroparesis, to declining oral motor strength or bronchopulmonary muscle strength that may be declining and affecting your ability to eat adequately. And besides the obvious GI and oral motor concerns, we also screen for any social emotional concerns that may be affecting your ability to access food and to prepare it. So just to give you an example, one of my patients unfortunately lost their mother to COVID um, uh, during those few years. And at our first post-COVID visit, I met with the child and the father, whose main concern at that point was, how do I feed my family now that mom's not there to take on that role? And how do I feed my child with a neuromuscular condition? We spent most of our conversation and time together just working on identifying, meal delivery resources, on preparing grocery lists, on accessing easy to prepare weeknight dinners and things like that. So this is what the family or the dad's needs were, and we met him where he was and supported him by providing him with resources he needed to achieve his goals of providing for his family on a budget. So it's not all about just clinical things, but we also want to look at, what affects then your nutrition as a whole, not just what you put in. Also, many neuromuscular diseases are progressive, and many of our patients have high energy needs, which are very hard sometimes to meet on oral intake alone. So, one of our roles is also to assess if our patients are safely able to consume adequate nutrition by mouth. And we collaborate with the feeding therapist and the physician to determine if our patients will benefit from a feeding tube as a supplement to their oral intake.
All right, so before we get into specifics around neuromuscular diseases and nutrition, let's kind of lay the groundwork for what basic healthful nutrition is. And you may have seen this graphic before. It's called MyPlate. It's produced by the USDC or the USDA, and it represents sort of the optimal proportions each food group should take up on your plate in order to be a well-balanced meal. And it can be a helpful tool when trying to improve your eating patterns. So when you look at this image, the first thing to notice is along the left side of that plate, half of it is made up of fruits and vegetables, right? Each of those take up about a quarter of the plate. The vegetables intended for this section are really non-starchy vegetables, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. Next, notice that about a quarter of the plate is reserved for grains. I would say that's both grains and starches. And then a quarter of the plate is over here on the bottom right for lean protein. And finally, should you want to, you could add a serving of low-fat or no-fat dairy. Now let's kind of dive into each section of that plate. If you need to refer back to the image of the plate, you can see it here in the top right of the screen. So starting with grains, this section includes starches like rice, bread, pasta, tortillas, as well as cereals and products made from wheat, barley, buckwheat, quinoa, corn, oats. You also see we have also potatoes there in quotes. That's because some foods are what we would call starchy vegetables, and they would be accounted for here. Those starchy vegetables would include things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, peas, and squashes like acorn and butternut squash. In addition to calories, the grains provide a degree of protein, fiber, valuable B vitamins, and minerals like iron, magnesium, and selenium. The general rule of thumb is to try to make half your grains come from whole grains. That will help you to increase fiber intake, and fiber can contribute positively to both cardiac and bowel health. Next, in that middle column, you see the protein section, and that's where we would include all meats, poultry, eggs, and fish, but also plants, plant foods like beans, lentils, peas, nuts, seeds, and soy products like tofu and textured vegetable protein. These foods provide protein, obviously, but also B vitamins, vitamin E, also minerals like iron, zinc, and magnesium. So as much as possible, we should try to choose lean meats, which would be chicken without the skin, lean ground meats, say 90% lean or better, and cuts of meat that don't have a visible rind of fat. Those would be lean proteins. The dairy section, that could be a glass of milk, lactose-free milk, or a fortified alternative, as well as things like yogurt and cheese. Dairy provides a lot of essential nutrients. These foods can be good sources of protein, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, choline, magnesium, selenium, it goes on, right? And vitamins A, D, E, and K, as well as several B vitamins. Note this section doesn't include some of the higher fat dairy products like cream, sour cream, cream cheese, or butter. Moving on to the fruit section. For this, think all fruits and all 100% fruit juices. While it's summertime and the fresh fruit is pretty great right now, the fruit you choose doesn't have to be fresh. It can be fresh, frozen, canned, or dried, and you can eat it any way you want. You can have it whole, cut up, pureed, or cooked. Fruits are sources of nutrients like vitamin C, folate, potassium, and fiber, while at the same time being low in the more negative nutrients like sodium and saturated fat, as well as calories. Note also that while juice has the same vitamins and minerals as the whole fruit, it lacks the fiber and very often will have added sugars. So for this reason, we do recommend that you focus on choosing the actual fruit over juice as much as possible. Next, let's talk about the vegetable section. That's in the middle. Consider that vegetables are organized into groups based on their nutrient content. For instance, dark green, red and orange. Another group would be beans, peas, and lentils. And then starchy is another group. The vegetable section here we're discussing should be made up of all the non-starchy vegetables. And for non-starchy vegetables, think collard greens, spinach, tomatoes, broccoli, cabbage, peppers, green beans, onions. Like fruit, these vegetables can be raw, cooked, fresh, frozen, canned, or dry. It doesn't matter whether they're whole, cut up, or pureed. You can have them any way you want them. Vegetables are sources of vitamins A and C, as well as folate, potassium, and fiber. And finally, not on the plate, but also worth mentioning, are a couple of things we should probably work to limit. Things like foods and drinks with added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium should be avoided as much as possible. For these, kind of think about sugar-sweetened drinks, alcohol, fried foods, baked goods like cookies, cakes, etc. One last thing that I'd note here is that you may have noticed a few foods sort of spanned sections on the plate, things like beans and peas, which may count as either a starch or a protein. If your intention is for them to count on your plate as both, then in that case, you would probably need to double the portion and make sure that you're getting enough to cover both of those. All right, this is just a grocery list template. I just included this here because I wanted to give you that link at the bottom. That's myplate.gov/resources. This is just one of several tools and resources you can find there to help you try to follow that MyPlate eating pattern.
Thank you, Tad. That was so informative. I think I learn more all the time. So after we've learned about the general use and contributions of all of these different food groups and how they contribute to a good balanced intake, I just want to point out a few things that are particular or more beneficial for us to be aware of when we have any kind of neuromuscular condition. So grains, we know, is a good source of fiber. And fiber helps with constipation, which is an issue with many of our neuromuscular diagnoses. It also helps in regulating blood sugar levels and cholesterol levels. And also the B vitamins in the grains gives us energy and keeps our body and nerve cells healthy. So that's important for us to know. Now, proteins have amino acids, which are their building blocks, and they're required for a wide range of functions in the body. They're involved in the production of hormones, the red blood cells, neurotransmitters, involved in wound healing, tissue regeneration, and muscle growth. And they can also be a source of energy. Vitamin E in some proteins maintains muscle function and helps nerves to communicate between the brain and body. And zinc helps with growth, which is really important for many of the children I work with. Dairy is the largest source of calcium and vitamin D, and we all know that those two are required for strong bones, and they're also a good source of protein, dairy foods. But in addition to helping with strong bones, calcium and vitamin D also help muscles to move, and help the nerves to carry messages between the brain and the body. And sometimes feeling low is associated with a low vitamin D level. So it does help with making sure your vitamin D levels are within normal limits. Moving on to the next nutrient that is important in neuromuscular disease or food group, it's fruits and vegetables. They provide fiber. We've already described how that is helpful in our diet. And antioxidants, which are a key component of the anti-inflammatory diet, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Fruits and vegetables, because of their fiber content, offer satiety, and that helps when you're controlling weight gain. It's a good low-calorie snack, and they're a good source of hydration. The folic acid in fruits and vegetables also helps muscle grow and helps your body use energy. Fluids are really essential for, I think, across the board for all neuromuscular diseases. We recommend a good intake to help with constipation, to help with heart function. It also helps thinning of mucus to prevent upper respiratory infections, and it helps prevent UTIs. Just to plug here for what is an adequate intake, I want to encourage everyone to discuss this with their dietitian rather than use hearsay equations or recommendations that they hear about how much fluid we need. Some common ones I hear is, oh, you have to drink enough fluids, that's half your body weight, or everyone needs 8 cups of fluids, or people have come up with equations they've discussed with me about fluid calculation. So just discuss with your dietitian what your individual needs are. That way you're not over or underestimating your needs, and it takes the pressure or the burden off making sure that you're consuming enough. Probiotics are something also that we often will discuss with our patients and recommend they take because they play a role in constipation, and they are an anti-inflammatory agent. Sugar and salt are two additives that I'm always talking that we need less of in our diets. Obviously, we are aware of sugar and the role it plays in speeding up the onset of diabetes, especially if you're on steroids. Excess sugar intake in foods and in beverages can cause weight gain, so we recommend limiting that to control weight gain. And of course, for dental health for our young ones who may end up with a lot of cavities, and for everyone else too. Salt is something also we discuss, especially for my patients who are on steroids. They forget about how salt can cause water retention in the body and then cause weight gain. So it's not just the high calorie foods and the sugars that they need to be careful about, but also the salty foods, especially when they're on steroids. And also limiting salt can help control or manage hypertension.
All right. So all of that is a really good basic, good nutrition overview that applies to everyone. Now, living with a neuromuscular disease can present specific challenges when it comes to following that or any other kind of healthy eating pattern. And while each neuromuscular disease has its unique challenges, many of those concerns are similar across them. And those are what we're going to try to cover today. Among those concerns are the achievement of a healthy weight. Notice the word healthy there is in quotes. Umme will talk about that in a bit. Difficulty swallowing or dysphasia, decreased mobility and all of the challenges that come with that, chronic or severe fatigue, remaining hydrated, dealing with constipation, and we get questions around fasting frequently.
So what is a healthy weight? And everyone has their own interpretation of it. And I know that weight can be quite a trigger when some of my families bring their kids into clinic, especially if their goal is controlling weight gain. So I often view weight as only a symptom or a manifestation of what other things are going on in management of the neuromuscular disease. Is the child gaining excessive weight because their diet is imbalanced or unbalanced? Or is the child losing weight because they're so constipated that it's affecting their appetite and they're not eating well? So I always use that as kind of a trigger to take the discussion further and delve deeper and find out what's going on. Why is this happening to your weight? And not looking at the weight as, the end goal. Yeah, just looking at that, but understanding what's going on behind it. Also, another thing we often consider is weight alone a good measure of your nutritional status? So, in some diagnoses, a higher body fat percentage is inherent to the diagnosis. That's just the way the body is built. And so, when we're causing weight gain, is that really healthy for that child? Because we want to make sure that weight gain includes both an increase in muscle and fat mass, and not just fat mass. So always trying to figure out whether, do we really want this person to gain weight, and what kind of weight are we aiming for? And then this makes it important for us to use skin folds and DEXA scans to kind of see where most of that weight is coming from. So the word healthy weight may have different meanings depending on your specific condition. For instance, in ALS, the main goal with nutrition is to maintain your weight to the extent that your breathing is not affected. This may be a heavier weight than what we may recommend for another condition. In SMA, a weight that maintains a BMI for age below the 25th percentile on the pediatric growth charts is recommended. So this may be lower than what would be considered healthy for someone who does not have SMA. So for today's purposes, again, we're going to focus on healthy weight, indicating a body size that helps you with mobility, immunity, recovery from illness, and prevention of skin breakdown. So again, we're drawing to the forefront the fact that we're not looking at weight as the ultimate number, but more that as an indicator of, are all these other things in your body functioning adequately? Okay, so some strategies that we discuss when aiming for a healthy weight are high calorie, high protein diets. If you need to, enhance some of the body stores, or limiting foods of low nutritional value if your body fat mass is really high and we need to target that, and encouraging activity, as much activity as is possible for you with your diagnosis. So going back to using the MyPlate method, we discussed with you how the MyPlate method can be used to eat a balanced, consume a balanced intake, provide you with the nutrients that you need to lead a healthy life. So continuing on that same theme, sometimes eating a high calorie, high protein diet is hard to achieve, just because it's hard to increase portion sizes, which you would need to do to increase caloric and protein intake, right? So instead of having to just eat bigger portions or having to eat 6 to 8 times a day, just swapping out some food choices on your plate may get you closer to achieving the goal of increasing your calorie and protein intake. So in the grains group, instead of just using like flour tortillas or white bread, go for the higher calorie options in the grain group, like raisin bread, muffins, croissants as breakfast items, bagels, pasta, rice, quinoa, Hawaiian bread, instead of just regular white bread. Under the protein group, try to choose the higher calorie versions of all foods. So breaded meats and chicken, whole eggs with the yolk. If you can add more yolks, even better. Nut butters like peanut butter, almond butter, nuts and seeds as part of your snacks. Hummus and other dips that can be used with other foods. And tofu can also be a good high calorie protein source. The dairy food is really easy to incorporate in our diet to increase the caloric intake. The easiest switch you can do for yourself is switch from a low fat milk to a whole milk. Use protein fortified milk, which is just adding milk powder, dry milk powder to whole milk. I often will recommend just adding dry milk powder as a protein source for a lot of my families, instead of them purchasing expensive protein supplements over the counter. cottage cheese, yogurt, full fat Greek yogurt is great. I mean, if you enjoy the taste of that, high in protein, high in calories. Drinks like eggnog and yogurt drinks, instead of just drinking water all the time, maybe 4 to 8 ounces of those drinks a day will add a lot of calories. And then allowing yourself to eat some ice cream, as dessert. So even though we're aiming for a high calorie intake, I always have to remind my families that does not mean you ignore the fruits and vegetables, because we all understand now how important they are and how much they contribute towards our overall health. The only thing we got to look for is good, high nutrient dense and high calorie versions of fruits and vegetables. So instead of fresh fruit, you can do dried fruits. You can add fat to the fruits, like add some heavy whipping cream to it, or you can add some Greek yogurt to it. Adding sugar to the food, so stewing the food with a little bit of sugar to increase the calories. For vegetables too, instead of just doing steamed vegetables or raw vegetables, eat them with added cream, like cream spinach, with some dips or dressings, and including things like avocado and olives in your intake as often as possible. Now, in addition to choosing the higher calorie versions of the different food groups to be on your plate, I also recommend doing what I call calorie boosters, or some foods that the sole purpose of using them is to add extra calories to your meals and snacks. And I always recommend that you use one of these foods that is under the column that says other with every meal and snack in the day. And there are things like sugar, honey, jam, jelly, syrup, gravy, butter, margarine, heavy cream, half and half, whipped cream, cream cheese, salad dressing, sour cream, canned coconut milk, and of course, high calorie, high protein nutritional drinks like Ensure, Pediasure, Boost. And if you do this consistently, add at least a teaspoon of these high calorie foods, switch to higher calorie food choices on your plate, you can easily add 300 to 500 calories to your intake without you eating more. And sometimes that is enough to help you gain some weight. So at the other end of the spectrum, I know gaining weight for people who don't need to gain, it sounds like, whoa, this is so nice. We can eat whatever, right? And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, and then you have to think about people who need to control their weight gain or achieve some weight loss, because that extra weight is not helping them be independent or is affecting their mobility. And for that reason, I'm often having to talk to a lot of my kids, especially with Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, who are on steroids and need to control their weight gain, because excessive weight gain can cause them to stop walking sooner too. So I want them to maintain a healthy weight. So for those families, they need to make some different kind of swaps on their food on their plate. And under the grain group, instead of raisin bread or croissants or bagels, they need to choose more whole grain breads, cereals, and pastas. And the reason whole grain helps them is because they're higher in fiber, so they keep them full for longer, and so they can go longer without having to eat again. Also, avoid baked items like muffins, pastries, higher calorie breads. Under the protein group, you want to choose the lean meats like chicken breast and beef cuts that have the word loin and round in it, avoiding breaded and fried meats, chicken and fish, and limiting the intake of nut butters and nuts. They're really healthy foods, but they're also very high calorie. So you want to be careful about how much you eat of those. And then in the dairy group, going only for the low fat or 1% or non-fat milk and milk products, and avoiding half and half heavy cream in your coffees and your milkshakes and all of that good stuff, and limiting the intake of cheese, which is sometimes hard. Moving on to the fruits and vegetables, eating fresh fruits and vegetables in their natural form or just cooked a little bit is the best way to eat them, the lowest calorie way to eat them. Again, bringing up the fruit juices. If you eat 1 or 2 oranges, you can feel pretty full with that, and it will tide you over an hour or two. But if you drink a cup of orange juice that probably needed 3 to 4 oranges to make that, you're not even going to realize that you're drinking, the calories equivalent to 4 oranges, which is like maybe close to 150 calories, as opposed to 2 oranges, which may be 50 to 75 calories. So, you don't realize the number of calories you're drinking when you're drinking a lot of fruit juices. And sometimes just eliminating fruit juices has helped a lot of my patients lose so much weight, and they don't even realize what they've done different because they get so used to not drinking juice. But that is one of the biggest impact changes that I encourage my families to adopt when they're controlling weight gain. When they're choosing fruit cups, like to send to school and to carry with them on trips, avoid the ones in heavy syrup. And dried fruits, although healthy, are really high calories, so limiting the intake of like raisins and dried apricots and dried mangoes and things like that. With vegetables, when you're eating salads with salad dressing, choose the dressing on the side so you're not dousing your salad with that, and avoiding butter and other kind of sauces added to the vegetables. Now, other things in general that we need to be aware of and try to limit our intake of when we're controlling weight gain is sugary desserts. So everything delicious like donuts and stuffed, Nutella stuffed croissants, and any kind of sugary desserts is something you want to limit. Again, if you hear my verbiage, it's not never eat them, it's limit. So you reduce how often you take them, not every day, maybe once a week, once in 2 weeks, and find other options. So I always say when you're taking something away, you need to find other foods you can replace it with. Otherwise, you're going to be hungry and you're going to fail at this because you're still going to be wanting something, craving something sweet. So find other options. Like I find things like dates are a good thing to pop in your mouth after a meal if you're craving something sweet. Doing some, maybe a small portion of Greek yogurt with some honey. And even though I talked about reducing the intake of dry fruits, maybe if you used it a piece or two to kind of satisfy your sweet tooth at the end of a meal, that would be acceptable. Avoiding processed foods. So anything that is processed and can sit on a shelf for a long time has a ton of additives in there, a ton of salt in there, and is not always the healthiest for you. So especially rethinking snacks is something I always am discussing with my families, because for us, we're so tuned to thinking about snack food as something that is in a bag, that we need to rethink things like fresh fruits and vegetables that can be also great snacks for you.
Sorry, I got a little trigger happy there.
That's okay. I thought it was time to move on.
It wasn't a hint, it was an accident. So the next topic we wanted to discuss was dysphagia, or the inability to safely swallow. That can be a very common experience across multiple neuromuscular diseases as well. And when dysphagia is present, it increases one's risk of aspiration and aspiration pneumonia. So to help with this, we have the ability to modify the texture of the foods that you're eating. And that could be as simple as choosing foods that are naturally soft and damp, like macaroni and cheese, for instance, mashed potatoes, or mechanically chopping or grinding foods into smaller pieces. Think ground beef, right? Or even pureeing if necessary. If you look at the picture of the carrots, you can see how that carrot sort of moves through the stages. They're called levels in the standard that we use for this, but for this, just kind of notice the composition of them. All the way to the left is just a regular carrot. That's just a carrot. The next one has been chopped, right? It's chopped into smaller pieces to make it more manageable. The third one over, that is a level 5, and that one's been ground or mashed. Moving on to level 4, the one on the all the way to the right, kind of at the bottom, that would be a level 4, that's pureed. And then level 3 above that is liquefied. So we can move foods through these different levels to get them to a texture that's safer and better for you if this is a concern. For liquids, we can thicken them, And what thickening does is it slows the swallowing process, making it more safe. To do that, there are commercially available thickeners like the ones you see there, Thick and Easy. Thicket is one. There's another called Simply Thick, and you can get those at just about any pharmacy, Walmart, grocery store, definitely Amazon. We can even use other foods as thickeners. Banana flakes, potato flakes, cornstarch, and even heavy cream can all be used to thicken up your drink. So an RDN may perform a swallow screening with you and then use that information to decide whether or not you should be referred on to a speech language pathologist or an SLP. They would then further evaluate your swallowing abilities. Some of you may have had a swallow test that's called a modified barium swallow, right? That's conducted by the speech language pathologist. What comes out of that is their recommendations. They may say that they recommend for you slightly thickened drinks and chopped or ground consistencies for foods. They do that based on the outcome of the modified barium swallow. And they may even be able to offer you some strategies. I know I work in the multidisciplinary clinic. I work very closely with our SLP there, and I hear her very frequently, depending on the type and origin of the dysphagia present, they may have them do things like tuck your chin when you swallow or turn your head to one side or the other. And mobility is another big concern with neuromuscular disease. And it's one of those that you may not think right off the top as being a nutrition concern. But when mobility is impaired, you may find grocery shopping to be more difficult. Food prep may be difficult, exhausting, or just impossible. But decreased mobility may also lead to weight gain, constipation, and in some cases, pressure ulcers that then themselves increase your nutritional requirements. So we have to find a way around this obstacle. A couple of recommendations would be to choose pre-chopped vegetables from the grocery store. You can get them frozen. They sell them fresh in the produce section. Frozen vegetables that aren't necessarily chopped, just in general, and convenience foods. Slow cooker foods, sheet pan meals, those are all ways to make larger amounts with less effort. Going on, fatigue. Fatigue is really common in neuromuscular diseases and affects virtually every aspect of your life, but certainly affects your nutritional status. Fatigue will prevent you from preparing your meals. It'll have you stop eating before you're finished eating, just because you're tired. And even worse, now remember that your throat is made up of muscles. Our SLP in my clinic is always reminding us of this. Those muscles get tired. They may be so fatigued that it makes it too difficult for you to reach your nutritional requirements orally. And so for this, you may hear from one of us that we recommend you move your larger meal up to an earlier time in the day so that you can eat that big meal before you've been talking all day, swallowing all day, and before you're super tired. People don't think about it much, but you swallow all day long. It's called saliva management. You've got to manage the saliva produced in your mouth. That requires swallowing. That uses muscles, and those muscles can get tired. You may also want to consider just cooking in larger quantities when you feel like it, and store that food or freeze it for later. Hydration, that's another challenge in neuromuscular disease, and it can be a challenge for many, many reasons. I used to work in a multiple sclerosis clinic where my patients there found it very difficult to get to and from the bathroom, and difficult more to transfer from the wheelchair to the toilet. Consequences of that were very often urinary tract infections. And so eventually we're going to have to drink anyway. So let's find a way around that. And it may also be because you're unable to safely swallow thin liquids, or maybe you just don't like plain water. It could be that you're avoiding or limiting fluids to avoid the embarrassment or discomfort of incontinence or neurogenic bladder. So we encourage people to work with the timing of your fluid intake. By that I mean increase your fluid intake when there's someone at home with you, or someone who can help with toileting if that's the concern. You may also, if you don't like the taste of water, you can flavor it. You can use Mio, Crystal Light. Man, there's a lot of those little flavor concentrates you can squeeze now. I saw that Gatorade has one. You can also just put a splash of fruit juice. whatever gets it in, right? Whatever makes you want it. But if swallowing thin liquids is not safe, then you might choose foods that are naturally higher in fluid content, like watermelon, soups, cucumbers, smoothies. And finally, constipation. Constipation may be one of the most common nutritional concerns that I run into in practice. And when severe, it can drastically affect your appetite and intake, on top of just being incredibly uncomfortable. There's many things that can contribute to this. Things like decreased mobility, walking less. Movement is important for regularity, bowel regularity. Decreased fluid intake or inadequate fiber intake. And for these, we suggest movement, including seated exercises, increasing fluid and fiber intake using the hydration strategies just discussed. And keep in mind, prunes are not a superstition, they work. So you might try prunes, prune juice, raisins, dates. And after trying those, if you're still having problems, then it might be time to use a laxative and possibly even ask for a referral to a GI doctor.
Fasting is another concern that not many people talk about, but that I want to draw attention to. Fasting for prolonged periods of time, and that's where there is some a lack of cohesion about what a reasonable period of time is. But typically between 6 to 8 hours, not being able to consume any liquids or foods that are sources of carbohydrates and protein can cause decreased blood glucose levels, ketoacidosis, and can also cause muscle breakdown. And this happens more frequently when you're sick, okay, than when you're at your regular medical baseline status. So in order to avoid fasting and making sure that you're not depleting your muscle stores, we recommend that you eat meals at regular intervals, which is really important to discuss with teenagers who love to skip breakfast. Make sure you're eating a bedtime snack. And if you're sick and not able to really eat a lot of food, making sure you're drinking a little orange juice or apple juice to prevent those low blood glucose levels. An anti-inflammatory diet is something that we're asked about a lot, especially when managing autoimmune disorders or in myasthenia gravis. So an anti-inflammatory diet is overall a healthy diet for almost anyone to follow. The main components of that diet are including foods high in omega-3 fatty acids, and those are contained in foods like walnuts, flax seeds, dark green vegetables, salmon, and sardines, including foods that are high in antioxidants like red, yellow, orange vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, green and black tea, citrus fruits, and other vegetables. And then foods high in fiber like whole grain breads and cereals. Spices like turmeric, ginger, garlic, cinnamon, thyme, and rosemary. And green tea is also a good part of that diet. The only thing that they require you to reduce your intake of or avoid in an anti-inflammatory diet is refined and processed carbs. So that includes white sugar and a lot of the processed carbohydrate-based, grain-based foods.
All right, moving on to supplements. I've been working in neurology, 12 years, I think. And in working with chronic illnesses, we see a lot of supplements being promoted with or without evidence. And so here are some that have shown benefits. When we eat a broad diet with a lot of variety in colors and textures and eat an adequate amount or quantity of them, most of us won't need a multivitamin. We'll be able to get every micronutrient that we need just from the foods that we're eating. But when your intake is decreased for any reason, a multivitamin is just a good idea. So if you remove an entire food group from your diet, think like celiac disease, or if you're a vegan, a multivitamin can be a really good backstop for any micronutrients you're not consuming enough of. The same is true when your intake is diminished because of the things we've just been talking about: fatigue, dysphasia, decreased appetites, or in some cases, taste changes. We know that people with neuromuscular diseases are more susceptible to long bone fractures. As such, a calcium and vitamin D supplement may be beneficial. Their creatine monohydrate has been shown to improve both strength and exercise ability. B vitamins, we've listed here B6, 12, and folate. I would expand that probably to just be a B complex in general. They contribute to cellular metabolism and play a role in preventing some anemias. And finally, fish oil and turmeric both have effective anti-inflammatory properties, and fish oil has even been shown to slow neuropathy. I said we'd talk about feeding tubes, so here we are. When one's not able to safely chew and swallow adequate nutrition to meet their nutritional requirements, we'll recommend a feeding tube. This is usually after in the adult setting, let me say, it's usually after continual weight loss and multiple unsuccessful efforts to stabilize weight. An additional indication exists in the case of ALS, and it relates to breathing functions. So if the forced vital capacity, which is a measure of your ability to exhale or blow out, if FVC decreases and begins to approach or drop below 50%, we're very likely to recommend you getting a feeding tube, regardless of your ability to swallow. The reason for this is because the procedure requires sedation, and breathing function must be adequate for that anesthesia. Folks in this situation don't have to use the tube for nutrition if they can still safely swallow adequate nutrition. They might just flush it with water every day and just continue to eat orally. Look at the picture on the screen. The picture on the bottom shows two kinds of feeding tubes. The one on the left is going into the stomach. That's called a G tube. You may also hear it called a PEG. The one on the right is going into the jejunum, or the small intestine. That's a J tube. It's important to point out here that it's possible to still eat orally with a feeding tube. I get this question all the time. In fact, I get people not wanting to even discuss feeding tubes when they need them for fear they won't be able to eat anymore. To the extent that you can safely eat, you can do that with a feeding tube. Some people will choose to eat orally and then supplement that oral intake with formula in the tube, while others will choose to get 100% of their nutritional requirements in formula through the tube and eat small and few bites just for pleasure. It really relieves a lot of pressure from people who have gotten used to spending 2 hours, 3 hours trying to eat a meal. You can get it done in 20 minutes now with the tube, and then just have a bite of the foods that you really want. Notice the image on the right. That's someone doing what's called a bolus feeding. They're pushing a 60 milliliter syringe of formula into the tube, and 60 mil is about a quarter cup, just so you can kind of picture it. If you were to remove the plunger and just let it go in at the rate of gravity, that's called a gravity feed. Sometimes instead of a plunger, you'll use a gravity bag, which you can put an entire container of formula into. So while these are the common routes of administration, if your stomach's not able to physically hold enough formula at a time, it might be necessary instead to use a feeding pump. And the feeding pump's purpose is that it drips the formula into the stomach at a much slower rate so as to not overfill you, but it takes a longer period of time. And a dietitian is who you should speak with to help with that decision. I'm asked all the time, what do I put in my feeding tube? You have some options. If you look on this picture, over on the left side, you see going down Jevity, Osmolite, Nutrin. Those are what I call standard formulas. They're readily available through your DME company, and they're the most common formulas ordered. They're often ordered in hospitals, but nowadays there are plenty of newer and more advanced options available. There's organic options. There are those made from real food like beans, salmon, chicken, and whatnot. Kate Farms over on the bottom right, that's a very popular formula. It's organic, plant-based, allergen-free, including gluten and dairy-free. This one has become very popular over the last few years. And finally, if you have the time and energy or have help that does, you can blend just about any food into a liquid thin enough to go into your tube. And that's what's happening up here on the top right picture with that blender. I will say, if you're going to do that, you need a good blender, at least a Ninja.
Okay, so moving on to our special population of pediatric patients with neuromuscular diseases. And we decided to put a spotlight on them because there are some things and needs that are different, and we address differently from in the adult world. The main consideration for children is that we need to promote age appropriate growth and development while managing the neuromuscular condition. So that adds an additional layer of complexity to managing the condition whilst trying to maintain adequate growth. So the first thing we need to be able to do is to assess their growth and weight gain as accurately as possible. So obtaining measurements for growing children, though, is not as simple, especially when they have contractures or when they are unable to stand on their own. So we often have to use alternate measurements for height and weight to monitor their growth. Tad, if you can move to the next slide. So some of the measurements that we use when we are not able to get our children to stand for a standing height are things like measuring long bones in the body, like the ulna or the knee height, or then doing the arm span, which is often measured prior to any pulmonary function test. When we don't have an ability to weigh the child because maybe our wheelchair scale is broken or we don't have one, or it's hard to use the wheelchair to fit on the scale that we have. We may use the mid-arm circumference as just as an indicator to see if body stores have increased or decreased, and that it kind of correlates to weight loss and weight gain, but it doesn't give us any specific numbers. And then also we need to assess, thank you, we need to assess skin folds to determine the difference between fat and muscle mass, and we'll do those measurements too. One of the other goals of good nutrition for children is muscle preservation. And one way to do that is to make sure that there is no muscle breakdown as a source of energy. So we need to include adequate amounts of grains as a source of energy for this population so that the muscle can be spared. Following low carb diets is not appropriate for growing children. And that's something I often have to remind my families, because a lot of parents do that for themselves. They're on low carb diets, or they consider carbs as the bad food, which for us adults is appropriate because we're not doing any more growing, right? The only growing we do is in one direction now. So, it's okay if you cut back a little bit on your carbs for that. But for growing children, they need the extra energy to boost their growth and to spare the protein to be used for all the wide range of functions that we've already discussed. So in addition to grains being a source of energy, other nutrients that are important for this population is specifically vitamin D, calcium, and iron, because we have until the age of about 22, 25 to build as strong bones as we can for the rest of our lives. So this is an important stage where we try to focus on bone health and make sure we're doing the best we can to maintain, to achieve maximum bone density for these kids. Another special consideration for children is that when you're working with children, you're never working with them in isolation. You're always working with the whole family. And the only way we can get any kind of success in any kind of diet changes, lifestyle changes for children is when the whole family is on board for it. So that's the first thing I always discuss with my parents and families, that in order for your child to succeed, you are all going to have to do this. Because it's not fair to single out one or two children who have a need to control their intake or modify their intake to eat differently from everyone else in the family. And of course, this is more important when they need to control their caloric intake. So that means that sometimes not bringing foods like juices, processed snacks, sodas into the house, so that it's not a temptation for the kids and you're not constantly having to say no and argue with your child about limiting that. So in addition to knowing what to have available in the house, a lot of our parents also benefit from talking to other parents or from support to receive some parenting strategies on how they can enforce the recommendations that are essential for them to stay healthy. A lot of my parents know what they need to do. It's just how do they get their kids on board and how do they get them to do those things? So I will spend a lot of time, just reassuring my families that, you're not being mean when you say no more juice or no having sodas in the house. That's what your child needs to avoid to be healthy. So don't feel guilty about not having them. And then if it's not in the house, occasionally when you're outside or at parties, it's okay for you to have a small portion of those. But if they have access to it every day, it's very hard to limit that. Moving on to school. School is hard enough, anyways, for most kids, especially middle and high school. And then you add to it the additional challenge of not being independent with some activities. And it requires a lot of planning and good communication with schools and teachers to make sure our children can be successful in school. So we need to work with the school to advocate for aids that can help children with, basic tasks during meal times, like opening packages or getting them their meals, and also helping them use the restroom. We have the same issue with children also, like Tad mentioned about avoiding fluid intake because they don't want to use the restroom. So again, having access to those additional help and having maybe access to a special restroom so that they can use it whenever they need to are other things that we can help them to make school life a little bit easier for them. Tad discussed criteria for G2 placement. And in addition to everything he spoke about, a patient needing a feeding tube because of them not being safe to eat by mouth or losing weight. For children, we also have to consider linear growth because poor nutrition not only affects their weight, but also stunts their growth and their height. And so when we see that kind of stunting, it becomes obvious that the child is not getting what they need to grow. So provision of a G tube or putting formula through a G tube helps them not only meet their caloric needs, but also all the other things they need for a growing body. So that's something we need to consider. And that's why I really, there are certain time periods in a child's life when it would be most advantageous to place a feeding tube so that it helps with periods of growth like puberty and things like during puberty and things like that. So I'm always having those conversations with my families around those times if the child is on the borderline of not meeting their needs. So a lot of some of the congenital neuromuscular diagnoses are associated with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And that's something that that parents need to stay involved longer with those when your child has any of those disabilities to help them make better decisions regarding their health and their medical status. And I only bring that forward because sometimes I find parents saying, oh, he's a teenager now, he makes his own decisions, which they may be doing with other teenage kids in their house. But when the child obviously has an intellectual disability, that's a lot of pressure on them to make the correct decisions. So at those times, I always remind the parents that they still need to be more involved with helping them make those decisions. Transition is another important part of working with children and their families. We're constantly working with how can we ensure that by the time this child transitions to an adult center, they're informed about their diagnosis and they're able to make good decisions if possible regarding their care. So at every stage of their life, we're trying to equip them with some skills that they need to get to the stage of independence. It doesn't happen that they're 18 and we're like, oh, you're going to transition out of our center by the time you're 20 and we have to come down and teach you all of this stuff. No, it happens all throughout the period that we're following that child. And the parents need to allow their children that space to answer their own questions in clinic, to ask their own questions in clinic. And at home, allow them a little bit of independence to kind of get more comfortable of taking care of themselves. That way, when they move into the adult world, they don't need that much hand holding and can be independent.
I realize we're running over and I apologize for that. We're nearly there. So if you can just give me a couple more minutes, we'll get through this last topic of payment. So if you ask either of us, Umme and I would tell you that everybody should see a dietitian. Sometimes that can be cost prohibitive. So many of you may attend multidisciplinary clinics where there's no additional fee to see the dietitian. If not, and you need to see one of us, you should be aware of how insurance covers those visits. Medicare under Part B will only cover dietitian visits for the diagnoses of diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and for the recipients of a kidney transplant within the past 3 years. It will pay for 3 hours of one-on-one counseling the first year and 2 hours in subsequent years. And both the copay and deductible are waived for those visits. So that's Medicare. Most private insurance, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, United, Aetna, Cigna, think kind of those big insurance names, they'll cover most of our visits as a part of your preventive services as a provision of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. This can be highly dependent on your policy, so it's worth calling to verify that your policy covers not just dietary counseling with a dietitian, but also counseling for the diagnosis that you're being referred to. And that's important because it's the combination of the service and the diagnosis that makes that determination. That's the visit. For enteral formula, as far as paying for the formula, Medicare will cover 100% of the cost of the formula if that formula represents 100% of your nutritional needs. If not, it doesn't cover any of it. It's covered under Part A if administered in an inpatient, long-term care, home health, or skilled nursing setting. In an outpatient setting, it's covered under Part B. And then finally, typically private payers don't cover it at all. And then Medicaid. Medicaid is administered at the state level, so the coverage may be different depending on where you're located. Some states may also have assistance programs to help with medically tailored meals. And so you should check with your state's health department. And I've included a link here to the section on the Medicaid website that provides a state-by-state overview of coverage. So you could use that as a resource as well.
Okay, since we're running over, I'm going to very briefly go over this slide. We hope that the whole conversation we've had with you has been informative and you've learned why a dietitian is a vital member of our care team, of your care team. Provided you with some good resources like the MyPlate to look for nutrition information and recipes and other resources that can help you, eat a more balanced diet. We hope we addressed some concerns, and provided you with some common strategies to address common concerns. Provided some information on supplements, on feeding tubes, on insurance. And let's not forget about the kids. Hopefully we address some of their special nutrition concerns too. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We hope you found this useful and we're open to questions.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation. I'm going to share my screen so that we can start out with questions. As we mentioned, we are a little bit over time, but if you could just hang in with us here, we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can. Just to our speakers, are you both okay answering some questions over time?
Yes.
Great. Alrighty, so we'll start out here. How to account for other coexisting diseases like diabetes. I have muscular dystrophy and diabetes and find fruits significantly elevate my blood sugar levels. Should I be selective about the fruits I choose?
So you do have to consider other conditions. We have to manage all of these at the same time. So what we presented today is sort of an overview of what the possibilities. Fruit is probably going to drive up your blood sugar. I recommend for that limiting fruit to just a couple pieces a day and combining it with protein when you do eat it. So if you're going to have an apple, put a little peanut butter on it. Maybe have a little cheddar cheese with it. Something with some protein will help mitigate that spike that you probably are seeing now whenever you have fruit.
Great, thank you. And then somebody else wanted to know, do you suggest whole milk, 2%, no fat?
What's your goal?
Yeah. And also it depends on the age, right? For my really young pediatric patients less than 2 years old, if they're not having issues with weight gain, I recommend whole milk because the growing brain needs fat, and milk is a good amount that we consume in the day, and it does contribute to that fat intake. So I agree with Tad that it depends on what your goal is. The protein and the calcium in all three kinds are almost similar. So the only thing you're missing is the fat.
Understood. Thank you. Let's see here. Are there dietitians affiliated with all MDA clinics? If not, how do I find one who understands neuromuscular disease? So I will actually take this one and you can add to it if you want to. Some of our clinics are affiliated with dietitians, some are not. You can ask your care team, and if you are at a care center that does not have a dietitian affiliated, I would suggest contacting our MDA resource center, and they're happy to connect you with different resources in your area. We will put the information for the MDA resource center in our chat. Do you guys have anything you wanted to add to that? Perfect. Let's move on then. I never put salt on anything, but it seems everything has salt already added. What do I do? Rinse the salt off before consuming?
Yeah. So for canned goods, you can rinse off a considerable amount of salt before eating them. Dump your beans into a colander and rinse them off. The other thing I'd say is to cook from scratch. Cooking at restaurants and having convenience foods is no way to eat sodium. There is no way to eat low sodium. So you really need to make your own foods that way. I'm sure Umme has better ideas.
Well, that's similar. Another thing we suggest is increasing the intake of potassium-rich foods along with that, because there is a sodium-potassium balance that needs to be maintained in the body. So increasing your potassium intake helps lower the sodium retention in the body. So I always say, if you're going to have, deli meat sandwich, make sure you have vegetables in it or on the side, and you eat a fruit on the side to bump up your potassium intake. When you're, just have to eat that high sodium food.
Thank you. What oils should I use to cook with? Should I avoid hydrogenated oils and seed oils?
So I tell everyone this: there are 3 oils you need in your kitchen: olive oil, avocado oil, and canola oil. Those are going to have the best fatty acid profile, and they're going to hit every smoke point that allows you to do every food process in the kitchen. Of those, avocado and olive are going to be the best. Yes, avoid hydrogenated oils, and I'm not really aware of a reason to avoid seed oils other than the internet at this point.
Thank you so much. I will be sure to add those to my grocery list. Someone else said, I like to cook, but using regular kitchen tools can be challenging. Where can I learn more about kitchen tools adapted for those with neuromuscular disease?
I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Umme.
You probably have more experience with this, but our occupational therapists in our clinic are really good about this, and I usually leave them to answer that question. But go ahead, Tad.
I mean, I would say, just if you just Google adaptive feeding devices, there are 1,000 websites out there that offer them. Poke around, see what's available, and it may be different depending on what's going on. For instance, these big fat handled forks, or utensils, so that you don't have to hold them, in an intricate way. You can just grip them like this. Those can be helpful. They make them hollow and super light, and they make them weighted. If you've got Parkinson's, the weighted one's probably the better option. If you've got any of the others that make you weaker, then you want the hollow light one. And so, yeah, speak with your occupational therapist. But if you want to look around, I would just go look around and see what's available. If there's something you're interested in, order it on Amazon or wherever it's cheaper. If you don't like it, send it back. But there's a lot of options out there. I have a whole lecture I do on this.
Great, that's good to know. Thank you so much, Tad. We'll do a couple more. Do canned vegetables and fruit have as much nutrients as fresh and frozen?
I would say that fresh and frozen, I would say frozen have the best nutritional value because they're picked at prime and frozen right away. So it kind of maintains their nutritional value. I would then go with canned because, again, for the same reason, they're picked and they're processed and canned. The only thing is that the salt content in them is high. So then rinsing them is important. And then fresh fruits and vegetables, we don't know how long it's sat out in on that shelf in the grocery store. Unless I mean, the best is if you can grow it, pick it, and use it. That's the best kind. But I would go with frozen, fresh, and then canned probably. What about you, Tad?
Oh, I agree. The only thing you're losing between fresh and frozen is possibly some quality. They may be limper, they may not be as firm or crunchy, but nutritionally, you're not losing anything. Yeah. And I've also found that if you find the brand that you like, you can find brands that satisfy quality as well.
Great, good to know. Thank you. We'll do two more. So I'm currently living in a nursing home and the vegetables are often overcooked and mushy. What can I do to get the nutrients that I don't get from the vegetables here?
I would say, like Dad mentioned, making sure you're taking a multivitamin, or if anyone can bring some food in for you, if that's an option.
I agree.
Perfect. We'll do one more. This one says, do you educate your clients on how to read food labels? What do you tell them to look for or avoid?
I do. I think we all do. I mean, I am always quick to point out the first thing you should look at is the serving size, because everything below that is about that serving size. And again, it kind of depends on your goals, but I do sort of separate them into sort of positive and negative ideas in my head. Sodium, cholesterol, saturated fat and trans fats are all things I would think of as sort of negative nutrients, things you want low. And added sugars. Protein, unsaturated fat, those don't necessarily need to be low. Fiber, those should be probably a little higher. And that's kind of the first thing that we talk about. Then I tell people, go and read the label on everything that you buy for your next several trips. It's going to be a longer grocery trip, but repetition is the way that your eyes get comfortable going to the right spot on that label. And the way you get comfortable knowing, oh, is 200 milligrams of sodium a lot or a little? Well, you know that through experience of comparing products. Umme, what is your answer?
I think you said that beautifully. I don't need to add anything to that.
I agree. Thank you for telling us what to all look out for. Just to respect everyone's time, I think we are going to move on. Thank you so much, Umme and Tad. We sincerely appreciate your time and expertise and everything you do for the neuromuscular community. If everyone could just hang in for just a little bit longer, I just wanted to wrap up with some information about MDA. Again, if you're new to MDA and you've been diagnosed with a neuromuscular disease under MDA's umbrella, or if you are a loved one of someone who is diagnosed, we encourage you to stay engaged with us at MDA. You can do this by visiting mda.org/join and completing a short form. Joining is free and will keep you up to date on the latest research, educational programs, and supports. Before we wrap up, I wanted to bring some upcoming MDA community education programs to your attention. These events are free for the community. You can register for these programs through our website at mda.org. First, I want to highlight our upcoming MDA Technology Series webinar, Equipment and Assistive Technology. This MDA virtual learning series aims to provide relevant, up-to-date information on mobility equipment and assistive technology for people living with neuromuscular disease and their caregivers. Next, you may have heard of MDA's Engage symposiums. These are in-person, multi-session symposiums which provide information from leading experts on a variety of topics, as well as opportunities for the neuromuscular disease community to engage with one another. You can visit mda.org to learn more about the symposiums near you. And just a plug, Tad will be joining us at the Dallas Symposium, so you can see him speak again. And again, before we wrap up, I wanted to extend a special thanks to our program supporters, Edgewise Therapeutics and Amicus Therapeutics, for partnering with us to bring you today's webinar. We would love to hear your comments about today's webinar. Once you leave the webinar, a webpage will automatically pop up with a short survey about today's webinar. Completing the survey will provide us with important insight as we plan for future educational programs. If anyone has questions after this webinar, please feel free to contact MDA's Resource Center at 1-833-ASK-MDA1 or email resourcecenter@mdausa.org, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you again, Tad and Umme, for your time, and thank you to everyone who attended. This concludes today's webinar, and we hope to see you all again soon.